I just want to go back to something you were saying. I think it's very, very interesting and very good point. This point about freedom and choice, and that we have micro freedoms. I remember when I was living in America, you would go down the aisle in the supermarket and there'd be 100 different forms of salad dressing, and you sort of think, I have amazing choice. Is this freedom? Well, no, not really, because freedom exists in your head, doesn't it, really? Do you think there's anything in this view which I have certainly heard, is that people are quite happy with that kind of freedom and essentially don't really feel passionately about the bigger freedoms anymore? Do you think that's true?
Yes, I sadly, I think there is a lot of truth in that. And I think it's partly an age thing. As we saw in the, I hate to come back to the EU referendum all the time, but there was no doubt that I think for a lot of the sort of younger generation, they just saw it as a nice, again, it's a choice, I can go, for a weekend to Paris or whatever, which of course they could have done before, but they didn't, I don't think they realised they could have done it before.
Yes.
Because, you tend to know your own experience. Yes, I think that is crucial. And I think it's almost like an exchange. I think in the same way, MPs, the MPs, it seems to me, enter into sort of an unspoken sort of Faustian pact, where they, in exchange for them having better pay, better, shorter hours, better conditions, and generally better life at Westminster, where they used to just have a little, cubby hole. In exchange for all of that, and also for an extension of the political class through things like the Scottish Parliament, the Welsh Assembly, even dare I mention, your own esteemed London Assembly. So the political class has done very nicely out of that and has grown and everything. But what they gave away was power. And they became emasculated, in my opinion. And the House of Commons has never tempted any sort of real to hold the EU to account. And it resembles to me what Louis XIV did to the French nobility. That he sort of tore down all their castles, everything, brought them all to Versailles, and gave them all sorts of wonderful balls and parties. And I see a great deal of that around, and I think in the same way that, yes, I think you're right. People have confused choice with freedom, and the truth is, if you've got a decent standard of living and you're able to go on nice holidays and you've got a roof over your head, why would you be angry? When you look at the revolutions, they tend to be where people are starving, don't they?
Yeah.
I remember that one in Tunisia, which launched that Arab Spring. That was somebody set fire to it's when people feel desperate, and we almost need to feel more desperate for people to really care about freedom, I think.
Back in, say, 1975, when the thing was started, and when you joined when you were very, very, very young, is it right to say, therefore, that you were looking at freedom and issues about freedom in economic terms? You mentioned the nation. Yes. You said we've always believed in the nation state, although at the time, surely then people didn't talk much about the nation state, did they?
It would. You're right. It was principally seen as economics. I remember all the strikes and the national industries going down the pan, Britain being the sick man of Europe, and all of that. And yes, I think that was my main motivation. I have to say, on a personal note, if I may go back even further than my school days, the very first sort of political memory I ever had, and it's really stuck with me, and I suppose one embellishes these over time, was when I must have been about 5 or 6 years old, watching Churchill's funeral.
Right.
Now, I'm not, I wasn't a Tory boy like William Hague. I wasn't, reading political speeches that time. But I was obviously a little bit interested, and of course that was a massive event. And the thing is, I loved history. I'd read all about history about this country, about and everything. And I think I saw this, obviously, this last great, perhaps the last great world leader that we had, and revered him. And then afterwards I saw Harry Wilson, you know, so in his Ganex Mac and talking about the pound in your pocket, and you know, and it was a terrible shock to me. I felt this was we were really something special in this country, and then we just seemed to be a nation, as far as I could see, that just had lost any self-belief.
Yes.
As nations do. You know, if you look at, Italy, the great, the country that created the Roman Empire, by the 19th century, you get these tourists going to Venice, I'm a massive admirer of the Venetian Republic, which had a huge influence on this country's politics and economics. But you get British tourists going there and saying, the locals just sort of seem to just not have any sort of get up and go, they're just sort of slouching around, they're ignorant, and these countries, nations can change dramatically fast. I often feel now, when you look at the Victorians, the self-belief that they had, that had vanished by the 70s. We'd come to believe, I think we'd gone from the one extreme of thinking we could do anything to thinking that we couldn't do anything. Yeah. And I suppose a big turning point then for me was afterwards. That was always in the back of my mind. I think it came to the fore with what was for me was the occasion that had the biggest impact on me after that, which was the Falklands War.
Right.
And that's where I think it changed for me, from being principally about economics to actually being more important than that. And that was a huge eye-opener for me. It was only a tiny fraction of what people had gone through in the Second World War, but it just gave me an inkling. And I particularly remember that point when initially everybody was getting on the side and wanted to support us, and then when it was clear that we were actually going to fight, they all sort of backed away. But it just gave a tiny feeling of what it might have been like in 1940 for people.
Yes.
When actually it was only when everybody else had given up that I think we regained our self-belief, thanks to Churchill, and this time thanks to Thatcher. And there was a blessed relief about not having to sort of think, we can't say this because it'll upset the Spanish. We just thought, right, we're going to do this.